When you read through Middle Eastern dessert recipes, there's three components that you'll likely see over and over again: Samna, Eshta and Sharbat. They form the cornerstone of many desserts such as baklawa, kunefa and atoyif, and for the most part you really need to nail those components to perfect the desserts themselves. I'm Obi, and on this episode of the Middle Eastern Pantry, I'm going to teach you all about Samna, Eshta and Sharbat. I'll show you how to make and use them, and we'll also discuss why they're important ingredients. We'll be using these in a number of recipes in the coming weeks, so hit that subscribe button so you can watch the videos as they come out. Now, let's get started. So what are Samna, Eshta and Sharbat? Well, the first one, which is also known as samn or ghee, is a form of clarified butter that is used extensively in sweet and savoury recipes. Sharbat is a simple sugar syrup. It's usually flavoured with spices or extracts, and is pretty much the only sweetener that goes into Middle Eastern desserts. Finally, Eshta is a type of cream, which has a thick texture and gives desserts a creamy flavour and mouthfeel. Historically, Samna has been used in the Middle East for centuries. In the times before modern refrigeration, dairy products such as butter or cream had a very short shelf life. Making Samna is effectively a method of preserving butter, and it's done by removing the milk solids within butter that cause it to go rancid. Regular butter contains about 82% fat, and the remaining 18% of its weight is a combination of water and milk solids. By melting and boiling butter, you can separate the fat from the water and solids, and what you are left with is 100% fat. That's the process of clarification, and because those milk solids have been removed, the fat is now shelf stable. Just like oils and most other fats, it is much more heat resistant, and it can last for at least 6 months in a moderate climate. Samna is also highly regarded for its properties as a high smoke point fat. Regular butter is unsuitable for frying, because when it reaches a temperature of 175 Celsius or 350 degrees Fahrenheit, the milk solids within it start to burn. That's called the smoke point of a fat, and when any fat reaches its smoke point, it begins to degrade in quality and can even become harmful. Clarified butter or ghee can handle a much higher temperature of 230 degrees Celsius or 450 degrees Fahrenheit, making it an optimal fat for frying. The final major benefit of Samna is the flavour. Unlike most oils, Samna actually tastes of the butter it was made from. This means you can use it in place of any oil and impart a buttery flavour on your foods. These two qualities are what makes Samna so important for Middle Eastern desserts. It's able to crisp up filo pastry and kunefa without burning, and all the while imposing a delicious buttery flavour on the dessert. In any of my savoury recipes where I mention using butter, you can directly substitute it with Samna instead. Making Samna is extremely simple. Take your butter and place it in a pot on the stove over a medium-high heat and allow it to melt completely. I'm using 1 kilogram or slightly over 2 pounds of butter here, which should result in about 850 grams of Samna. Once it has melted, turn the heat down to medium-low and every few minutes stir the pot. Eventually the milk in the butter will begin to boil and foam up. Use a spoon to remove the foam every time it appears and allow the butter to continue heating for about 10 minutes. Once the foaming slows down, turn the heat up to medium-high and the butter will come to a boil. This will cause the milk and fat to completely separate. You can see the clear yellow butter fat and the drops of milk that are suspended within it. Keep heating the oil gently and the milk particles will get smaller. When they're about this size and they easily sink to the bottom of your spoon, the clarification process has finished. In total, it took about 15 to 20 minutes to clarify 1 kilogram of butter, and smaller quantities will finish a lot quicker. Let the clarified butter cool in the pot for about 15 to 20 minutes. Take a large container and sterilize it, then place some cheesecloth over the opening. Pour out your clarified butter into your container and it should have a wonderful golden colour. The milk solids which you saw on the spoon will have all sunk to the bottom of the pot, so be sure not to accidentally disturb them or tip the pot too much. When you get to the end of the pot, there will be plenty of milk solids mixed in with the fat. I'd recommend leaving them in the pot, and instead you can strain the remaining fat into a smaller container. I always use this before cracking into the main one, and it might have a slightly milkier taste. The leftover milk solids can actually be eaten like a cheese, and they have a nutty flavour. In Egypt this is called morta and it's considered a bit of a local delicacy. In terms of sharbat, these syrups are used to add sweetness to Middle Eastern desserts such as baklawa. When the pastry is baked, there's usually no sugar in baklawa, and you can't just sprinkle granulated sugar on top. The liquid form of the sharbat allows it to spread evenly throughout a tray of baklava, where it can reach all the corners and penetrate all the layers of pastry. Some desserts such as atayef are dunked in the syrup to sweeten them, and for the most part it's customary to serve extra syrup alongside these desserts. Apart from being useful in making desserts, simple syrup is great for sweetening drinks as it dissolves really quickly. The syrup can also be a great vehicle for getting flavourings into your desserts. You can use whole spices or citrus fruits to infuse the syrup with a spice flavour. Some of the popular spices to use are cardamom, cinnamon, clove, saffron or lemon peel. You can also flavour the syrup by adding in liquid or powder flavourings. Some of the most well-known ones are rose and orange blossom water, which give the syrup a floral flavour, or there's the classic vanilla powder. By changing the spices and flavourings you add to the syrup, you can really change the flavour of the entire dessert. The syrup can be made to have a few different consistencies. A thin runny syrup is what you use to pour over atayef or for dipping. A medium or thick syrup is what you would dip and soak fried atayef or baklava in. To make sharbat, place a small pot on the stove over medium-high heat and add in 250 grams or 8 3/4 ounces of granulated sugar. If you're adding a powdered flavouring like vanilla, you can add it in now, and I used 1 teaspoon of vanilla powder. Add in half a tablespoon of lemon juice, which will help prevent the syrup from crystallizing. Finally, add in 150 ml of 5 fluid ounces of water and bring the pot to a boil. You should avoid mixing the syrup the entire time that it's on the stove. Mixing it can cause the syrup to crystallize, which means when it cools down it will reform sugar crystals. Instead, you can swirl the pot if needed, but from experience the sugar will all dissolve without any stirring at all. The lemon juice we added will do a good job of stopping any crystallization, but if you don't want to use lemon juice, you can add liquid glucose instead. A ratio of 1 part glucose to 3 parts sugar will be effective at preventing crystallization. Once the syrup comes to a boil, check if there's any sugar left in the pot, and give it a swirl if needed. Turn the heat down to low and bring the pot to a gentle simmer. It's at this point that you would add in any whole spices and allow them to infuse into the syrup. Set a timer for 12 minutes, and when that is done the syrup will have thickened. You can test the consistency of the syrup by dipping a spoon in it and seeing how the syrup flows on the spoon once it's cooled. For a lighter or heavier consistency, adjust the simmering time by up to 5 minutes in either direction. Once you have your syrup to your desired consistency, you can add liquid flavourings such as rose or orange blossom water and cook it for 1 minute further. Pour the syrup out into a jug and allow it to cool completely before use. This stuff never goes bad, and it's really easy to make it in large quantities. We'll be using this in every dessert that we'll make this Ramadan. The final component we're looking at is Eshta. In the Middle East, you could pop down to your local dairy store and get a block of clotted cream. This is what is generally known as Eshta, and for certain kinds of baklava it's a must-have topping. If you want to learn how to make traditional clotted cream, check out this video, which I'll link in the description box below, and let me know if you want a recipe for it in the future. For most kinds of baklava, you actually don't want to be using real clotted cream, and instead you want to make what's called Eshta kadeba or liar's Eshta. There's 2 reasons behind this. Firstly, regular clotted cream can be expensive to buy in large quantities, and while you can make it yourself, it requires a decent amount of fridge space. The second reason is that clotted cream is not heat resistant. If you were to bake it in the oven or fry something containing clotted cream, the cream will simply melt and disappear. The fake Eshta that we are making is much more heat resistant, and so instead of melting it will simply soften and char. Another benefit of fake Eshta is that you can actually pipe it into any shape you want. If you take the set cream and whip it up into a fluffy texture, you can pipe it out using a regular piping bag. This makes it a lot easier to get even layers of cream when you're making things like halawat jibn or stuffing atayef. So if you're making something which will be cooked after adding the cream, your best bet is to make this fake Eshta. If you're making something that doesn't need cooking, you can either use this or real clotted cream. To make the Eshta, add 4 tablespoons of all-purpose flour to a jug or bowl. Next, add in 4 tablespoons of cornstarch and 2 teaspoons of sugar. Add a pinch of salt and then gradually begin to whisk in 350 ml or 11 3/4 fluid ounces of whole milk. Your aim should be to incorporate all the flour into the milk without forming any lumps, and you want to get this mixture as smooth as possible before moving on. Next, add in 400 ml or 13.5 fluid ounces of heavy cream. Mix it well with the milk and once again ensure there aren't any lumps. Place a pot on the stove over medium-high heat and pour the mixture in. Whisk this continuously without stopping for about 8 to 10 minutes. If you stop mixing, the ishta may stick to the bottom of the pot and form some lumps. If you feel your mixture isn't very smooth, you can use an immersion blender to remove any lumps. When your mixture looks like this, cook it for a couple minutes further and then remove the ishta from the heat. Pour it out into a bowl, or if you want to make a block of ishta, pour it out into a plastic wrap lined container. Place the ishta in the fridge for about 4 to 6 hours to cool completely. Once cooled, your ishta should be quite firm like this, and you can now cut it into slices for serving. To whip it up, I like to use an immersion blender as it makes good work of the thick texture. You'll want to process this for a few minutes, and at first it will go lumpy, but then it will start to go smooth and fluffy. When it gets to the texture of whipped cream, it's ready to be used. I like to place a piping bag or sandwich bag into a deep glass and add the cream to the bag. You can add a decorative nozzle to the bag before filling it, or just cut off the tip. This will allow you to pipe the cream out into consistent lines, and more importantly, it will allow you to fill small treats like these atayef. So that's how you make 3 important components which are used in many Middle Eastern desserts. Next week I'll be showing you how to make atayef, and we'll be using the Eshta and Sharbat in it. And in a few weeks we'll be making a wonderful cheese kunefa. Don't forget to leave me a like or comment if you found the video helpful, and subscribe if you haven't yet. Thanks to our wonderful patrons making this video possible, and I'll be back soon with another recipe.